There are games that you know, even if you don't play them. You know that every Call of Duty will be a 6-hour-long recruitment ad with gruff sociopaths mag-dumping their way through a third-world country. Every From Software game comes with a story only a philosophy PhD could understand, and boss fights that make you wonder if you really ever were good at video games. And every Bethesda game will have a community patch out within days of release. But less often are there games that throw out every preconceived idea you had about it, the anti-Call of Duty. These games sit between genres, the epitome of the hyphenate. These aren't games where innovation and groundbreaking are marketing terms thrown around, they are guiding mission statements. These are the games that seek to shatter everything you thought games could be. This is the pedestal that the original Metal Gear Solid sits upon, the origin point of one of the most iconic franchises in the history of the industry, and the one that made Hideo Kojima a household name. I should be honest here, I didn't grow up with Metal Gear Solid like most of my friends and what seems to be a majority of the online left. While everyone was creeping through the Russian wilderness in Tiger Stripe, I was beating The Legend of Spyro, A New Beginning, for the third time. And maybe that's because I was poor, being raised by a single mother in the American South, but I mean, it could just as easily be assumed that 8-year-old me just had bad taste in games. Still, that doesn't mean I can't right some wrongs 20 years later. So let's boot up the game and learn some history.
Oh my god, will you please let me get a fucking shot in?
The only Hideo Kojima experience I put significant time toward up to this point was Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, which I played sometime around 2018. I remember it being really fun, if a bit odd. I picked it back up just a few months ago to get some footage for my Dark Souls 3 video, but ended up playing a lot more than I thought I would. I was immediately struck with how different it felt compared to every other game that tackled similar subject matter, a war game with a distinctly anti-war and almost anti-Western sentiment. It was, like I said before, the anti-Call of Duty. Up to this point, I'd been reasonably skeptical of the high regard my friends and the internet at large tended to throw Kojima's way, but Metal Gear Solid 5 was a stark reminder that this man and the team he's built over the years undeniably has the sauce. That brief re-immersion into Kojima's tendencies as a storyteller prompted the whole concept for this video, to go through the original Metal Gear Solid games one by one as a first-time player and explore what they talk about and what they had to say about the times and minds they emerged from. So here we are. The very beginning. Technically. The thing is, Metal Gear Solid is a sequel. There are 2 entire games set before it, Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, and characters and events from those games shape the events of Metal Gear Solid. But given how MGS1 sort of solidified the mainstream status of the Metal Gear franchise and in so many ways became the first work where Kojima's style truly started to coalesce, it felt important to start here. Metal Gear Solid opens with a slick cinematic cutscene, reminiscent of the 80s action movie openers that no doubt inspired Kojima. Colonel Campbell, Snake's commanding officer, fills you in on the key plot points. Terrorists have taken over the Shadow Moses nuclear disposal facility in Alaska. They're demanding the remains of their deceased former leader, Big Boss, and if they don't get their way, they'll launch a nuclear weapon in 24 hours. You are Snake. You're retired, but you're back in action because you're probably the only one who can pull this thing off. Your mission, rescue the DARPA chief, Donald Anderson, and the president of weapons manufacturer Armstech, Kenneth Baker. Then determine if the terrorist nuclear threats have any teeth, and if they do whatever it takes to stop them. The very first thing I internalized about Metal Gear Solid was how sharpened the stealth mechanics felt. The VR tutorial missions get you up to speed on the language of sneaking, vision cones, patrol patterns, and how to interrupt that flow to your advantage with sound cues and footsteps. One thing it makes especially clear is that you need to avoid combat as much as possible. Getting spotted isn't game over, but generally speaking, it's always better to retreat than attack head-on. The first zone of the game then gives you a wide playground to experiment with these systems. You're encouraged to monitor the situation, figure out your own path from point A to B, and rewarded for exploring away from that path whenever possible. That's one thing that actually surprised me. I went in expecting a pretty linear experience, a sneakier COD if you will, but got something closer to exploring the mansion in Resident Evil. There's locked doors, backtracking, elevators, and shortcuts. It evokes a pseudo-Metroidvania world design that nudges you, if not outright screams at you, to backtrack multiple zones for essential items you're now able to access. That open-ended level design was something that caught me completely off guard. There are still limits to this openness, and the world layout itself is still functionally a line running north to south with little to no branching paths. Considering this game came out in 1998 though, 3 months before I was born, and was marketed primarily at a young, male, preteen audience, the simplified design checks out. They're clearly pushing the mid to late lifecycle PS1 hardware to its limits, and a sprawling, interconnected world design a la Dark Souls would have both melted the now yellowing plastic console and alienated their target demographic. As I crawled through the Shadow Moses facility, learning the layout of each room, the placement of every guard and security camera, I found myself really absorbed into that moment-to-moment tension. There was some real excitement at how the game might expand upon these systems as I played it. But this is a game directed by Hideo Kojima, so those expectations too would be shattered. The boss fights in MGS1 feel like an antithesis to the relatively open-ended design of the stealth sections. More often than not, rather than finding your own unique solution to a problem, you're required to find the intended solution and execute a specific set of instructions in order. Ashley and Anthony Burch, two siblings responsible for some of the best parts of this world, from Ashley's prolific voice work and Anthony's writing behind the best Borderlands game, put it best in their 160-page breakdown of how their favorite childhood game aged into dog water. Just as Modern Warfare consisted of the sniping level, followed by the level that takes place in total darkness, forcing you to use your night vision goggles, and the level where you're on a moving truck shooting at things with a stationary machine gun, MGS1 uses comparatively brief stealth encounters to break up its major action set pieces, like the gas-filled tripwire room, or the level where you punch your shirtless brother a bunch of times. Stealth only occupies the spaces between these linear blockbuster scenes. Stealth is the mortar connecting MGS1's bricks. Maybe I jumped the gun on calling this the anti-COD. Revolver Ocelot is your first bona fide boss fight, encountered minutes into the game once you've cleared the tank warehouse. Already we have a subversion of what we come to expect. The tutorials and first zone up to that point have encouraged mastery of stealth, but right here is where stealth is rejected and the game leans into the action part of tactical espionage action. Ocelot knows where you are, you can't hide, and if you try, he'll ricochet a bullet straight into your nicotine-addled flesh. Instead, movement is key. If you manage to dodge every slammed into a wall, you're given an opportunity to jump out and land a quick shot or two. If you're nimble enough, you can hit him while he's moving, but it's much easier to wait for his reload. That's the key though, you have to have a really fucking good grasp of the awkward late 90s controls to have any chance at ducking his blows and taking him down. You're tasked with all this while avoiding the center of the room and aiming with utmost care lest the explosives strapped to the arms dealer you're here to save take the whole room with him. Because it forces the player to wrestle with the already awkward controls in a situation where a single misstep will lead to failure, the Ocelot boss fight is an oddly appropriate final exam. The preceding levels taught the player that aiming, shooting, and running are awkward and difficult interactions. The Ocelot fight acts as a gate where the player must prove that they can handle the inelegant controls to do something delicate. If they can't, the rest of the game will be an absolute nightmare. Most of the Metal Gear Solid boss fights work like this. They're struggles with the controls rather than with the antagonist. That focus on mechanical finesse remains a theme with our next boss fight, Vulcan Raven. Your first fight with Raven takes place in a snow-swept canyon between the tank warehouse and your next destination, the nuclear storage building. The first obstacle appears in the form of landmines covering the bottom half of the map, which, if you didn't backtrack to get the mine detector back in the warehouse, are going to be really fucking annoying to deal with. But let's say you were a good student and did. Stealth, again, doesn't matter here. Vulcan Raven appears behind the wheel of an M1 Abrams main battle tank and, like Ocelot, knows where you are at all times. Your task now is to 1. Close the distance, 2. Constantly keep moving to avoid both the main cannon and the 50 cal on top of it, and 3. Pray to whatever god you're still able to believe in that you can toss a grenade onto the roof of the tank turret to take out the gunner. Chaff grenades help with the first step, knocking out the turret just long enough to get in close. Unfortunately for you, those chaff grenades also knock out your radar, leaving you blind to the landmines. I'm sure there was some clever give and take intended here, and if you have a half-decent memory, you can remember what paths are clear, but that's still a real annoying trade-off. But okay, as long as your timing and aim fit the bill, the fight isn't too difficult once you actually reach the tank. It's a bullet hell now, and you're role-playing Shohei Ohtani pitching a four-seamer, and with enough luck, you should only die like 3 or 4 times. This motif of testing the player's movement continues into our next fight against Grey Fox, an invisible cyborg ninja standing between us and Funny Wes. If we're to see this first set of bosses as a series of gates to test the player, then rather than firearms or explosives, this fight tests our ability in close quarters, hand-to-hand combat. Guns are ineffective, and while chaff grenades can temporarily stun him, they only allow you to land one hit, needlessly prolonging the fight and wasting a valuable resource. Instead, the strategy that I found works best, at least for his first real phase, is to manipulate his movement. If you can force him to chase you around a corner, you can trick him into walking right into your fists, making that first phase a breeze aside from his crazy somersault kicks. After his next phase, which is just a souped-up game of hide-and-seek, he gets in close and uses his speed and invisibility to teleport straight behind you. If you're still able to manipulate his movement and force him into the tightest corridor of the arena, this limits where he can appear, and with enough speed and finesse you can heel turn 180 degrees and land blows before he can even lift a finger. Contrasting the previous fights, I really enjoyed this one against Grey Fox once I got the hang of it. It's a final exam that tests your ability in melee, an aspect of the game that's not often explored. It's a very limited aspect, but just simple enough to work. Stealth, again, has no real bearing in how this fight plays out, but in so many ways this fight solidifies that MGS1 is a game about movement, and manipulating that movement to your advantage. I just think that's cool. Capping off this quadrilogy of movement-based bosses is Psycho Mantis. After his party trick where he peeks into your memory card and roasts you for not saving often, and the kinda genuinely cool moment where he shakes your controller with his mind.
Whoa!
He gets to work flinging around the Ashley Furniture Home Store catalog to every corner of the room. Bullet Hell is back in style, baby, and there's about as much dodging and weaving as you can stomach. But what makes this fight interesting, and what it really tests the player on, is how it plays with the fourth wall and the very concept of interactivity. MGS1 by the Mantis fight has already made its stance on the fourth wall clear. What wall? Your support team of the codec has already dropped lines like, press the action button with a straight face, and Kenneth Baker told you to look for Meryl's radio frequency by looking at the physical CD case for the game. Psycho Mantis tests the player's ability to think outside that box, and begin manipulating the console itself outside the purview of the controller. Like every boss fight before it, there's no stealth. Psycho Mantis knows where you are, and not just that, he knows what you're thinking. He knows every move you make before you make it. In real terms, this just means he can dodge every bullet and punch you throw at him while your controller is plugged into the Player 1 slot on your PS1. But if you were to say use the fake Lost Signal Hideo gag screen to quickly swap your controller over to the Player 2 port, Mantis can't get a read on you anymore. This doesn't necessarily trivialize the fight, you still have lazy boys to dodge, but it does allow you to finally hurt him. With effort and thankfully little reliance on luck, he buckles, and you're treated to his somber monologue where he embraces, then somberly regrets his cynical conviction that war and chaos is the inevitable genetic fate of all living beings. The Psycho Mantis fight kinda ruled. It's a shame that the next fight easily wins for most unnecessarily frustrating part of the game. The Sniper Wolf fight takes away all that pesky knowledge and mechanical skill you've attained up to this point and forces you into a cinematic sniper duel, and God help you if you didn't backtrack to get some diazepam. There is no test in this fight aside from your ability to follow directions. You specifically need a PSG-1 sniper rifle, which is currently locked behind a door in the basement armory of the tank warehouse. To proceed further, you are given no other choice than to backtrack all the way there to grab it. The Sniper Wolf fight, like much of MGS1, isn't designed to afford the player meaningful choices. It's more about making the player feel as if they're in the middle of a blockbuster action movie. These moments are roller coaster rides where you can only do a limited number of things. If you do those things, you'll feel awesome and immersed. If you try to color outside the lines, the game will slap you in the face and tell you to start the section over. Except this time, follow directions. Once again, there is no stealth. But there's no movement either. There's no dodging and weaving a high-powered rifle in a long stretch of hallway with minimal cover. In this moment, you are rewarded for executing the intended set of instructions as perfectly as possible. You're playing Guitar Hero with a gun. Today's video is sponsored by me. If you're really enjoying the video so far, please go check out my Patreon. For $3 a month, which is about the price of one of these, you can get early access to my videos, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, your name in the credits at the end of all those videos, and exclusive patron benefits in the community Discord server. And also, for this video, something I'm really excited to show you is there's a zine version. I made it. I made this myself. You can get a printable PDF. I very intentionally made it work on any cheap home printer that you have. You could print this out, distribute it around your own city. It's up on my Patreon right now, and I'm really excited. By the time this video has gone up, I've already printed out a couple of these and thrown them around my city, and if you found this video through one of these zines, that's really fucking cool, and you should leave a comment to let me know that that's how you found it. Go to my Patreon, you get all those cool things and none of the kidney stones. Back to the video. Metal Gear Solid is often described as a cinematic game, and an innovator in that space to boot. It's less game, more interactive Kino. The parts where you're playing and having your skills tested are only meant to fill the gaps between story beats, dished out through meticulously animated cutscenes with a moving underscore. But while MGS1 no doubt went on to influence a whole generation of video game storytelling, and continues to provide the framework for linear AAA game stories at large, I'd argue that MGS1 was not the progenitor of these design elements, but a culmination of them from seeds planted decades earlier, if not centuries. One might go so far as to say that the image, rather than the word, has always been at the forefront of Japanese culture. From the ukiyo-e woodblock prints of the floating world to the highly stylized visual experiences that comprise traditional no and kabuki theater, from the sexually charged shunga prints that gave way to vivid and chilling gekiga film books that were the precursors to modern manga comics. In every era of Japanese history, we find that the most popular art forms were visual in nature. One might even say that the haiku, short Japanese poems that present in as few words as possible a vivid image of a seasonal nature scene, are visually oriented. Even the Japanese written language is made up of pictographs that come from representational drawings. In the very earliest days of the video game industry, two distinct philosophies emerged on either side of the Pacific. Western attitudes around media prized a kind of discipline around consuming art, and the written novel took the crown for what peak culture should epitomize. When arcades and home consoles first hit their stride in the late 1970s, games were treated as just that. Games. They're toys for kids to play and win, or at least get the highest score. The idea of adding character and story, let alone the idea of games as an expressive artistic medium, never took hold in those early days and probably would have gotten you laughed out of the boardroom. The West believed in an adult who didn't need pictures to understand what was happening. And around the same time, though, across the lake, manga and animation were exploding in popularity, even among adults. The notion of the image grew up differently in the Western world, where picture books, comic books, and chapter books with illustrations are looked down upon as children's entertainment. A child who reads books without pictures is said to be reading on an adult level. An adult who avidly reads comic books would be thought strange. But the Shikaku Seidai, or visual generation, a phrase that now describes even today's middle-aged Japanese, privilege the image as a method of communication and so have a love for comics and animation. Pretend you're a young adult in Japan in the late 70s to early 80s. You've spent much of your upbringing reading manga with striking visuals and larger-than-life characters and heavy-hitting themes, and seeing much the same on your TV and at your local movie theater through anime. There's also this new growing industry where you get to create these images and even have the audience interact with them. Of course you're going to use it to tell a story. Why the hell wouldn't you? In Breakout, 1976, developed by Atari, the player had to bounce a ball back to the top of the screen and break a wall of blocks one by one. Western Gun, developed by Taito, featured two cowboys that shot at each other. These two games were still very limited by the technology of the time, which allowed only a few small black and white images to be displayed, but Breakout and Western Gun illustrate the emerging difference between American and Japanese game design. Guess who also entered adulthood around then? Born in 1963, Hideo Kojima came of age on a steady diet of manga and animation, along with the classic tokusatsu films and TV shows of the era. Spicing up this diet was a steady influx of foreign media. Kojima cites Agatha Christie novels and American TV shows like Little House on the Prairie and Bewitched for much of his early exposure to media outside Japan. Now, you wouldn't expect a man whose social media bios state that 70% of his body is made from movies to be an avid reader. In the process of making this video, I read Hideo Kojima's autobiography, which is less an autobiography and more so a collection of essays with an introduction and afterword that contextualizes the whole thing. In that introduction, he talks about a core part of his daily routine. I go to a bookstore, pick out books, take them in my hand, buy the ones that call to me, and lose myself reading them. Even on my business trips, I can't feel at ease unless I have several books in my bag. Picking up books and reading them is more than a habit I've maintained through life. It's a part of who I am. I was a latchkey kid. And as the first one home, turning on the lights was my duty. Opening a book in solitude was my routine. Books kept the feelings of isolation and loneliness from crushing me. My father's early death contributed to a lack of role models in my life. But inside books, I was able to find adults and teachers to guide me along. Kojima then talks at length about his process for finding and consuming stories, how he doesn't want to have art and ideas given to him through a filtered algorithm like you'd find on the internet. He actively seeks out the experience of going to a bookstore, browsing the shelves, and just buying something that he thinks looks neat. Not everything is a winner in his own words, but even that process of finding out what he does and doesn't resonate with is such a valuable tool for honing his own personal creative sense and passing on the best of what he finds to the next generation. Almost like genes. Cultural genes. You see where I'm going with this? Kojima is obsessed with memes. Yeah, okay, laugh it off or groan because you've heard the phrase Kojima loves memes a billion times before, but after reading his autobiography, I guarantee you, You are underestimating it. The in-jokes don't even hold a candle to how much the idea of consuming and passing on memes to those that come after motivates this man. In case you're unfamiliar, I'm referring to memes in the classical sense, as coined by disgraced author and evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins to describe ideas that are spread and passed on through cultures. Kojima sees it as his duty, his purpose, to consume as many memes as possible and integrate what he feels is the best of it into his own work and hopes to push others to do the same. A person can only meet so many people within the span of their lives, but through books, movies, and music, we can meet vastly more people and have vastly more experiences than is possible in real life. Our inherited genes alone do not make a person complete. By adding up a variety of experiences and absorbing memes as through books, we grow as individuals. When I was still a student who hadn't come into his own and wasn't yet a video game designer, I was able to keep going thanks to the memes told through stories. Whenever I was worried or uncertain about my future, I looked to stories for my compass. By experiencing unfamiliar times and places, I expanded my own world and was able to refine my outlook and perceptivity. I believe that creating things is only possible through connections with other people and works and history and all kinds of other things. Then that newly created work will give someone else a push and move the world forward. I want to keep on doing that as long as I live. So how does this work in practice? How does Kojima ingest memes and combine them into new diabolical mimetic concoctions? How did we get that Death Stranding trailer? Picture yourself as Hideo Kojima. You're on vacation to Iceland before Death Stranding was ever a twinkle in your eye. You're in a taxi and the driver mentions how he's in a band. Not just any band, but Komodo, who some call the Icelandic Joy Division. And you fucking love Joy Division. You devoted a whole essay in the creative gene to just Joy Division. You and the driver hit it off, and he recommends a record shop to hit up while you're in town. And you, being the curious, meme-hungry individual you are, take him up on the rec. You enter, grab a few CDs that speak to you, and just as you're about to check out, a song comes on over the store stereo. It's a song by a local band called Low Roar, and you fuck with it heavy. So before you check out, you make sure to go grab a copy of that album too. Take it back to Japan with you. At this point, the music was just with me. I'd found it, and it was fermenting at the bottom of my awareness, but it hadn't yet been born into a new meme. Then, as I was in the trial and error process of figuring out what to do for the trailer's music, I suddenly thought of Low Roar's I'll Keep Comin'. Me plus me connected as if the union had been planned from the start, and a new meme came to life. Kojima's philosophy around combining different ideas and experiences into new memes centers around building his own personal library of works that he personally resonates with, rather than simply imitating whatever was popular at the time. I mean, could you imagine the Death Stranding trailer dropping in 2016 and it's set to, like, fucking Heathens by 21 Pilots? He goes on to explain how this process extended into other aspects of Death Stranding's development too. He loved Norman Reedus and Mads Mikkelsen from the pile of masterworks they've been involved with, and used his pull as one of the most beloved game designers of his generation to get in the same room as them. Similar stories mark his relationship to Guillermo del Toro and others. I mean, not even living, breathing human beings are safe from eternal storage in Kojima's golden hoard of memes. This is what originality means to Kojima. He doesn't look for specific stories to build from, he lets them build him. Kojima's body may be 70% movies, but it's also made of the Shikaku Sedai generation that he emerged into, made of Joy Division's tragic lyricism and Columbo's unmatched wit. It's made of the I Spy books he'd read with his kids, the Space Battleship Yamato episodes he'd watch with his dad before he passed away. It's made of the Sony Walkman, the Apple iPod, Nagahara Yodogawa's enthusiastic commentary before each night's feature on Sunday foreign movie theater. Kojima is made of memes and makes it his mission to connect those memes in forging his own. We can call Metal Gear Solid an interactive movie, an innovative stealth game, and a gripping political thriller. But MGS1 only embodies these taglines because of the work put in by so many of the creative voices that inspired Kojima and the visually oriented culture that spawned him. It's an example of a game as a story first and a system second. While it may not have been the first game to prioritize a cinematic narrative, that crown belongs to 1981's Donkey Kong, it was the final nail in the coffin to convince the mainstream West what had already been obvious in Japan for decades. Games are a bona fide storytelling medium, ripe for experimentation and creativity. Hideo Kojima recognized that fact, and the opportunity he had to build memes for the next generation on a truly global scale. Like every project of his to follow, Metal Gear Solid is a homunculus of the memes that built him. I'm not Western, I'm not Eastern, I'm not Japanese. I'm Hideo Kojima. Because the games I make are played across national and cultural boundaries, I'm sometimes called Sekai no Kojima, meaning Kojima of the world, but there's no need to let myself be confounded by some nickname. The only thing I need to do is create my own world, the world of Hideo Kojima. Sharing that with the rest of the world is my karma. I made up my mind. I don't need a Satori or epiphany. I will bear my karma and go on living with it. The Sniper Wolf fight might not have aged well as far as immersive gameplay experiences go. It's a limited, locked-in pop quiz of a boss fight that only rewards you for taking the specific intended route the developers had in mind. You need to watch Meryl almost die, backtrack all the way to the Tank Warehouse's basement armory to grab the PSG-1, and pop a couple Valiums. Did you know diazepam is another name for fucking Valium, by the way? Then patiently wait for Sniper Wolf to pop out so you can line up shot after shot until she's dead. Obviously, we can compare this to modern sensibilities. The influence of immersive sims and the prioritization of player agency took hold in the wake of your Deus Exes and Bioshocks. If we hold that as the standard, the limits look ridiculous, almost unnecessary, filled with missed opportunity. Why couldn't I use stealth, the game's core fucking mechanic, to find my own route to Sniper Wolf and take the fight to her? Why couldn't I initiate a dialogue check against a charisma stat to de-escalate the fight to begin with? If we look through this lens, of course the game's gonna suck balls, and unfortunately for me, the only other Metal Gear game I have to compare it to is Metal Gear Solid 5, a game with an unparalleled sandbox that affords the player almost limitless options for literally every scenario. But hey, MGS1 came out in 1998. Games in that era were less simulations of worlds and more mechanical reflex tests for the player. And if we punish that kind of game design, we'd never have Celeste, which is another game that asked you to do a very specific set of actions to progress from point A to B. Maybe that comparison is a bit unfair. Metal Gear Solid does have open sections where you're encouraged to explore and find your own way, while Celeste is a 100% precision platformer from beginning to end that punishes almost anything except the intended route. But I think it's a relatively solid parallel in regards to how linear MGS becomes at points. Kojima has a specific intended story to tell, an intended series of memes to convey to the player, and he wants the player to participate in the story the way he would direct an actor. He also iterates that ultimately Snake is his own character, separate from the player, and the Sniper Wolf fight is the first time this seed's planted. More on that to come. In the sequence following the Sniper Wolf fight, you learn that you didn't actually kill her, as she ambushes you with a squad of soldiers. Now in Foxhound custody, Snake is subjected to torture at the hands of our old friend Revolver Ocelot. You're supposed to mash the action button as fast as you possibly can to resist electrocution, and if you fail, you die. You're allowed to give up, but if you do, Meryl dies. Once again, mechanical skill and outright speed take a predominant role in how the story plays out, and in the context of one of the story's only true branches, whether one of the supporting characters you've come to know and love makes it to the end alive. In the following sections, you're essentially on rails until you clear the communications tower, another distinctly linear section where you're corralled into a single spiral staircase, shooting at enemies pouring in from both directions. Even then, the boss fight that follows it, Liquid Snake behind the stick of a Hind D attack helicopter, still creates an action-oriented scenario where you float from cover to cover avoiding both gun and rocket strikes. And then you're faced with yet another Sniper Wolf duel, in a similar setup to the previous fight, but in a much more open arena. The same mechanics still apply. You still need the PSG-1, you still need the Valium, and you still need to patiently wait for her to pop out and land a shot before she can land one on you. It's only with your next boss fight after her that the reins feel loosened, allowing you to, shocker, vary your approach. The second battle against Vulcan Raven, putting aside how a little unsettled his portrayal as an Inuit shaman made me feel, is unquestionably the best boss fight in Metal Gear Solid. For the first time in the game, you're encouraged to use stealth against a boss. Keeping out of his vision cone and only engaging in the brief pockets where you can get an angle on him transform this fight into a true extension of the stealth gameplay in the connecting sections of the game. Better yet, you're given a whole toolbox with which to take him on. The Stinger missile launcher is the best bread and butter damage dealer against him, but you can also lay traps in the form of claymores or C4 around the arena, or snake a Nikita missile through the corridors to find your mark on his backside. Because Raven is susceptible to so many different types of damage, and because he tears the arena apart as the fight progresses, the player is encouraged to not rely on a single tactic over and over. You must keep moving, keep trying new methods of attack, and keep improvising, all while staying out of Raven's view. The Raven fight combines all of MGS1's myriad systems into a tense and non-linear encounter that still withstands the test of time. It doesn't hold a candle to the kind of sandbox presented in more modern games, even subsequent Metal Gear games, but in a game where just a few minutes ago your wrist would be slapped for thinking outside the box, the ability to tackle Raven on your own terms felt like a welcome release. This penultimate fight with Vulcan Raven busts open the cap on the final sections of the game. You've made it to Metal Gear Rex, a hulking manifestation of post-Cold War nuclear anxiety. After a brief encounter with Liquid Snake and Ocelot, you're made to backtrack once again, but with a little leeway. Turns out the PAL key you've been carrying to disable Rex's nuclear capability functions is 3 keys in one, changing shape based on external temperature. So you activate the room temperature key, then backtrack to anywhere that's cold, presumably the freezer arena you just fought Raven in, then travel somewhere hot, presumably the smelter room you saw on your way in. Once you've slotted all 3 keys, fuck! You've been tricked! Foxhound used you all along to activate Metal Gear after they fucked up and killed Donald Anderson. You're promptly faced with the only option left. Destroy Metal Gear Rex. It's a tough fight, but springboarding off the Raven fight, stealth actually plays somewhat of a role here. There's a short gap between when the fight starts and when Rex finally activates. If you're quick, you can bolt over to a corner and hide out while the giant dinosaur robot tries to locate you with its radome. Once an angle opens up, you can schwack that radome with a Stinger missile. Immediately, stealth's gone, but you get to utilize it just this once to maintain the element of surprise and draw first blood. The fight proper calls back to that quadrilogy of movement-based bosses faced in the first half of the game. Maintaining just the right distance and learning to read Rex's attacks becomes key to timing and landing a quick strike on its radome. It's a little closer to Dark Souls in this respect, where you're encouraged to learn a boss's moveset and predict its attacks. When you've dealt enough damage, the cockpit opens, revealing the pilot and your final target, your clone brother, Liquid Snake. Grey Fox also hops into the fray, helping you take down Rex, sacrificing himself in the process. There's a scripted moment where you're briefly returned to control of Snake behind the scope of the Stinger missile. You think you're being given a choice to either end Liquid Snake now, but take the dying Grey Fox with him, or to let both of them live at least a little longer. But that's not the direction Kojima gave you. You can't go changing the script, young lady. I don't care that you went to Juilliard. Pressing the fire button only makes Snake repeat the same line.
No glad I can't do it.
Usually, agency overrides such as this arise when a video game wants to show the player something the player can't be trusted to do themselves. If the designer wants the hero to unleash hell in a way that the player can't accomplish with their in-game verbs, they show the hero doing it in a cutscene. If the writer wants the player to do something morally ambiguous or horrific to progress the plot, but they're worried the player won't bring themselves to do it, the designer will override the player's agency and force them to act in accordance with the script. Snake's refusal to kill Grey Fox doesn't fit into either of these categories. You want to kill Grey Fox, hell, maybe need to, depending on how badly injured you are at this point in the boss fight, and Snake steadfastly refuses to do the one thing that would be the most intelligent, most dramatically appropriate, and the most badass. There's a few angles to this very intentional, unskippable act of removing agency from the player in order to show a moment of hesitation and ultimate denial of taking an ally's life. On the one hand, it's Kojima's story. He's got memes and he wants to spread them. On the other hand, it's a distinctly powerful moment that humanizes Snake as a character separate from the player. It's a clear reminder that no matter what you've been made to believe, you are not Snake. You will never be Snake. And your actions are not Snake's actions. After you've defeated Metal Gear Rex, then beaten the shit out of your little brother, you finally book it out of Shadow Moses altogether. Then you're given a brief but potent meditation on the concept of genetic fate. These moments that highlight the disconnect between the player and Snake explore that idea. The game ends with Snake choosing life, after all, and riding off into the sunset with Otacon to build a life away from the military's rigid command, and more importantly, the player's rigid command. He refuses to let his genes, his code as a video game character maybe, determine his fate. Genetic fate as a final clincher theme in MGS1 becomes that much more interesting when you pile on Kojima's fascination with memes as the genes of culture. The
DNA of the soul.
Kojima may want to leave us with the idea that our physical genes don't determine our fate, but he sure wants to drive home that the ideas and art we choose to take in absolutely do. The memes we choose versus the genes we don't. Metal Gear Solid Off-Rip has been fascinated with this disconnect between the player and Snake and the idea of interactive storytelling altogether. How do you tell a consistent, powerful story with rich characters and themes in a medium where all of that can be ignored for the fastest clear or the highest score? MGS1 offered 2 solutions. Play with it when it works, tighten the leash when you have something really important to say. The idea of Snake as a separate entity from the player, yet still affected by the player's actions until he chooses to refuse them, also engages in a conversation about violence and hero worship. Depending on how you played, Snake could be a stealthy pacifist that avoids violence unless absolutely necessary, or a bloodthirsty action hero a la Rambo that leaves naught but death and destruction in his wake. Liquid confronts you on this fact.
So why are you here then? Why do you continue to follow your orders while your superiors betray you? Why did you come here? Well, I'll tell you then. You enjoy all the killing. That's why.
What?
Are you denying it? Haven't you already killed most of my comrades?
That was...
I watched your face when you did it. It was filled with the joy of battle.
I was the one killing the soldiers. I was the murderer. I can measure the weight of the killing because I was the one who got to choose whether or not I pulled the trigger. No game has gotten the "you enjoy all the killing" theme quite right yet, but Metal Gear Solid makes a thematic connection through player choice and interactivity. This is the way MGS1 plays with interactivity and forces you to reckon with the consequences of your actions. Surprisingly organic in ways even newer games tend to fumble. Sure, there's more than a few games that explored violence, and even fewer that fully nail it, but not to the scale of a whole series like Metal Gear. Nearly every entry shoulders you with the weight of the violence you perpetrate when said violence is optional. I floated between calling MGS the anti-COD and not throughout this essay, but while both firmly stake their flag in the cinematic gaming experience camp, Call of Duty can never confront violence the way MGS does. In sitting with Metal Gear Solid and Hideo Kojima's creative philosophy these past however many months I've spent working on this video, I steeped myself in this particular approach to creating. It's not a lie when I say that playing this game and reading into the man behind it and how he sees the world changed how I see the act of making art. My initial skepticism gave way to a really healthy respect for Kojima as an artist and a storyteller, and his fervent curiosity for narrative of all forms genuinely inspired me. And then he appeared in an AI slop ad for Prada. You really thought I was gonna glaze Kojima this whole essay, you fucking buffoon? I'm a fucking scoundrel. I'm always a step ahead. You can't do shit to me. You can't fucking predict me. I'm the fucking Joker. It's hard to say how much creative pull Kojima had over the 6-minute AI-generated short film that premiered at Prada's Mode event in early June of this year, but he sure didn't say no to being involved. It features the likenesses of himself and another director he collected, Nicholas Winding Refn of Drive fame, in a campy 1950s Technicolor sci-fi romp with some awkward product placement for Prada. I'm not showing it on principle, but take my word for it, it looks bad. Not even like quirky, weird bad, it's just a fever dream of a short film. How could this be? How could someone who seemingly values the human connection found through narrative storytelling participate in such an actively anti-human publicity stunt? After the film dropped and the wider Kojima fan base let out a collective snotty cry at their goat becoming washed, he felt the need to clarify his own personal stance on AI. He's not personally interested in it as a primary creative tool and doesn't believe it'll be able to do that within his lifetime. He does see it as a janitor for creative chores, while humans still provide the main creative thrust in a project. He's referred to generative AI as a friend in the past, in that it could help boost efficiency. It's also true that people in Eastern nations tend to see AI as less of a boogeyman like we do here in the West. The Pew Research Center conducted a study that showed here in the States, 50% of those polled showed more concern toward AI than excitement, while in Japan, that number is a much slimmer 28%. It doesn't excuse the gross environmental impacts, the invasion of privacy, the militarization, and a laundry list of other harms perpetrated through the push for generative AI, but it does explain why someone like Kojima would be more receptive to starring in AI slop and seeing it as a useful tool. That and money talks. And then it hit me. I don't think it's a huge reach to say that Kojima views AI as potentially the ultimate meme machine. Think about it. Kojima centers his creative process on taking in as many stories as possible and using connecting ideas within those stories to create his own. It's not a dissimilar process to the way LLMs take in training data and spit out lethal casserole recipes. He has less concern with the implications of AI, the displacement of thousands of entry-level creative jobs in a field he evangelizes, because it both mirrors his own creative process and he sees those entry-level jobs as creative chores and not their own distinctly human artistic processes. And fuck, dude, that's not even touching on the misogyny. One of the first things I learned about Snake minutes into my first MGS1 run is that he is a total horn dog. He openly flirts with nearly every feminine character in this game, with a few noteworthy exceptions that we'll get into. The first of these interactions starts with Naomi and Mei Ling, two women on Snake's support team led by Colonel Campbell. Let's see these play out.
Nice to meet you, Snake. It's an honor to speak to a living legend like yourself. What's wrong?
Nothing. I just didn't expect a world-class designer of military technology to be so cute.
You're just flattering me.
No, I'm serious. Well, I know I won't be bored for the next 18 hours.
Come on. I can't believe I'm being hit on by the famous Solid Snake.
I remember. First I'm strip searched by Dr. Naomi here, and then all my weapons are taken away. Imagine yourself put in that position.
Well, if you make it back in one piece, maybe I'll let you do a strip search on me.
I'll hold you to that, Doctor.
It's a little cringe, but that cringe is the point. Remember, this is a game for young boys in their early teens in the backdrop of the 1990s who are socialized in such a way to believe that when you flirt with a woman, they're supposed to be bashful. They're supposed to pretend not to want it, but they actually do. Naomi and Mei Ling fill this out in spades, blushing and playfully brushing off Snake's advances while he stands alone in a snowfield on a mission with guards around every corner and the pair of women sit next to each other in the same room. Crucially though, Snake refuses to flirt with two very specific women. Sniper Wolf, who obsesses over him with sexual overture from the moment we meet her, and Nastasha, another mission specialist and weapons expert assisting Snake from the war room. We can all agree that Sniper Wolf doesn't have the best romantic chemistry here, given how she tries to kill him. But Nastasha? He has the same relationship with Nastasha as he does Mei Ling. She's an aide in a remote location, an attractive woman, and her voice perpetually sounds as if she is mid or immediately post-coitus. She's the one person who seems as if she'd be open to a little grab-ass between missions, and he doesn't say anything even remotely suggestive. The immediacy of the sexuality, the possibility that a woman would actually be willing, seems too much for him. Let's talk about Meryl, Snake's love interest throughout the story that may or may not turn the whole thing into a fridge script, depending on how hard you can mash the circle button. We first meet her immediately after the death of DARPA Chief Donald Decoy Octopus, disguised as the DARPA Chief. Our first interaction establishes a few things. She wants to be a legendary soldier like Snake, but dislikes Snake for being a condescending dick. She finds that her first taste of combat isn't all that it's cracked up to be, but still wants to prove herself capable. She also has a distinct walk if you stare at her butt. Not a joke. Later in the game, you're expected to pick her out while she's disguised as a guard, based on the way her butt moves. This is a game mechanic now. This scene is objectifying. It's sexist. It undermines the game's attempts to characterize Meryl as a smart, tough, self-possessed woman. It's also, infuriatingly, one of the only interesting gameplay twists in the series. Here, for once, is a problem that can't be solved by simply shooting the enemy from a distance with a silenced pistol, or grabbing them by the neck and killing them in 2 seconds. The butt mission is more suspenseful and nuanced than the more bombastic, less sexist moments that surround it. Thankfully, I didn't have to stare at every guard's ass in the storage building basement to find Meryl. Rip to Anthony Burch, but I'm different. I just had to wait for her in the fucking women's restroom. Throughout the game, Meryl is hypnotized by Psycho Mantis, kidnapped by Foxhound, and either becomes the subject of a dead wife montage or rides the backseat of your snowmobile as you dart off into the sunset. Kojima later canonized the latter ending for her later appearance in MGS4, but in my first run, I got the former. My thumb just wasn't in it. I'm sorry. But every chance Snake gets up to that point, he talks down to her. He tells her how she's not built for war, that it's only for the ultimate macho dude. Only someone who smokes cigarettes and hates women can withstand the horrors of a battlefield. And does Meryl disagree? Maybe. Yeah, at first. But as the game continues and the duo interacts more, Meryl falls head over heels for him, and ultimately the events of the story prove Snake right. Yeah, I'm a dumb broad. I'm a total rookie. I love you, Snake. Meryl had the chance to be a strong, proud character with agency in her own arc parallel to that of Snake's. She could have had a serious impact on the outcome of the story and the themes it explores, but the plot goes out of its way to morph her existence as a character into a motivating force for Snake. If she lives, epic! You got the girl! If she dies, damn, that sucks. Here's one of the few moments you get to see Snake show genuine vulnerability and remorse. That lasts barely long enough for a bathroom break before you've completely moved on and live happily ever after with your new best friend Otacon. There's other examples from just MGS1 of women existing only in service of Snake as a character, in particular Sniper Wolf's singular obsession with him from her introduction. But Meryl, the butt mission, and her almost or absolute fridging are the starkest examples of how this game uses women. This is the most lukewarm of surface-level feminist takes, I know. The weak, inexperienced feminine character in a story becomes a narrative punching bag in service of a gruff, hardened male protagonist. It's a trope that's been around as long as we've had stories. And hey, maybe it's just this minor thing, this one infraction that he quickly learned from and, never repeated again. Oh my fucking god.
When your psychic... Room for one more?
It asked to scan underneath my feet.
Because there's so much that's ridiculous about Metal Gear Solid apart from its representation of women, it's easy to ignore the problems with its female characters and dismiss Kojima as wacky and lovable. But the problem doesn't end with Kojima. It's everywhere. These narratives are just so thoroughly baked into our cultural subconscious that they're not even called into question, which makes it easy to replicate them without thinking and even easier to consume them without thinking. In Kojima's quest to take in and pass on the plethora of memes he's acquired throughout his time on this earth, it's only natural that he passes on one that's been so ingrained in our culture. But maybe that's the problem with Kojima as a storyteller. He consumes stories at a genuinely massive scale and even finds parallel chords between them, but he doesn't often critically think about that media outside of how it affected him personally. He understands themes, and his works are bursting with them. I don't doubt that for a second. But when everything he makes is fundamentally a mashup of his own personal greatest hits, sometimes the more toxic elements of those hits boil to the top and change how we relate to the message at a story's core. Kojima thinks on a truly cosmic scale with his work, but as we dive into them below that cosmic level, it becomes clear that he's forgotten to metaphorically stop and smell the roses. We could brush off these moments from his stories where women are sidelined and objectified as just fan service or products of their time. If Kojima outright said so and acknowledged the mistakes he's made and how he's made efforts to correct them in subsequent work, I'd be inclined to believe that. But I don't think he ever will. His lovable memes are too valuable to him. We can't ignore this. I can't ignore this. In discussing Kojima's and Metal Gear Solid's legacies, we can't throw out an aspect of the work that's been there from the very beginning. It's not fan service. It's a gross pattern of behavior. After I finished Kojima's autobiography, I started reading more. I already had a library card. It was a huge boon to my ability to write more fleshed out, well-researched essays, starting with my one in Signalis. But I hadn't read for the sake of reading in a very long time. Kojima, for all his faults, pushed me to start taking in more stories myself, and to start allowing more experiences into my life and to learn from them. I started going to my local library more often, and not to research a topic this time. I wanted to do as Kojima does, visit a bookstore, or in my case, a publicly funded library that I can access for free, and walk the shelves, grabbing whatever looked interesting to me. On my first adventure, I checked out Artemis by Andy Weir and My Murder by Katie Williams. I stopped by a thrift store and perused their book section too, and grabbed In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware along with War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. From there, I extended past books. I started going to more local shows, seeing new bands I'd never heard of, taking in their lyrics and riffs from the front of the crowd and feeling the bass like I'd never felt before. I talked with new people, asked them questions, and learned their stories. If I were Kojima, I'd call these my new beloved memes. I felt real kinship with Hideo Kojima. Stories allow us to inhabit a new body, a new identity, performing any number of roles against any number of backdrops. But I also felt a growing undercurrent beneath all this, the core difference between myself, a 20-something trans woman from the Midwest, and Kojima, a 63-year-old man from Tokyo. For one thing, everyone who's played a video game in the past 20 years knows his name, and I'm still a niche internet micro-celebrity to 5 terminally online queers, but that's not the point I'm getting at. Kojima grew up in an era defined by the media he consumed, the Shikaku Sidai, or visual generation. Throughout his life, he defined his existence around that media, choosing to live in the pages of the countless books he's read, build his vacation condo in between the frames of the movies he's watched, and backpack through the songs on his Walkman. Meanwhile, there's me. And I guess I just spent that time living. Brad Bird, director of Iron Giant, once said in an interview with the Chicago Tribune, "Animation is the illusion of life, and you can't create that illusion convincingly if you haven't lived it." I'm a pretty firm believer that that sentiment extends to all forms of storytelling. You can't create compelling, impactful stories if you haven't lived a life to make stories about. I'm not saying Kojima hasn't lived an eventful life. He's been alive 36 years longer than I have and accomplished so much more than I ever will. He's experienced great personal tragedy and had to become a rock for his family in turbulent times. He's traveled the world and taken in dozens of cultures therein. But it is pretty telling that the book marketed as his autobiography is a collection of essays about his favorite stories and how those stories affected his stories. I am not a better storyteller than Hideo Kojima. It's not a contest. But in the stories I've told, the scripts I've written, the videos I've put out on this channel, I've tended to pull from my own life in telling the story I want to tell. And the stories I resonate with most tend to be autobiographical in nature. In the stories I write but never publish, I base characters off the people I've known, the places after the cities and towns and shops and cafes I've been in, all through the undeniable lens I view the world through as a trans woman. I don't know if I can say the same for Kojima. I mean, there's value in his approach to taking in experiences through art that you'd never be able to otherwise, yet as powerful as his approach felt when I first read it, and how much it shifted the way I view the act of creating itself, I can't lose sight of my own unique voice. Metal Gear Solid is an iconic game. I can't deny that. The juggernaut cultural cachet behind it, along with its sequels and spin-offs, cannot be ignored. And I can't deny that the game is fun. Diving into it these past few months has taught me so much about the nature of stories in an interactive medium and how we can play around with that nature to convey new ideas and comment on the world we live in. That said, Kojima wields his meme machine and cannot help but make stories about stories. In doing so, I'm afraid he might have forgotten to tell a story about himself. But if he hasn't forgotten, and if these toxic elements of his work directly illustrate how he views the world, then I'm fucking terrified of the pedestal we put him on. Hey, thank you for watching. This video took so much time and effort to make. The past 6 months of my life has been dedicated to nothing but Metal Gear Solid, and I am so glad to be done with it. If you really enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, continue talking about what I talked about in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything, anything I could have elaborated on more, anything I just straight up got wrong, because Kojima is a dude with a crazy, massive, towering legacy in the games industry. And I'm really curious to see what everyone thinks about the things that I've talked about. I can promise my next video will definitely not take as long as this one did. I told myself I was going to put out a video every 2 months this year. And it's been about 6 since I put up my last one, 5 or 6 months. It was end of January, right? Yeah, something around there. My next video, stay tuned. Hop on my Patreon. There'll be updates on there. Nab yourself a PDF copy of one of these, print it out, toss it around your city, because zines are more important than they ever possibly have been before. Bye, and thank you for watching.